That night, my husband Ethan threw a stack of papers onto the table. His voice clipped, each word sharp. Sign this. From now on, this house is mine. You? You're a guest. At the top of the document, I caught a glimpse of how he had crossed out my name in the ownership section and scrawled his own instead. But in my purse, I still had the original copy I had just pulled from the locked cabinet showing that the property was acquired with my grandmother's inheritance and is held by the CBW trust established before our marriage with me as the sole beneficiary. In that moment, I realized I wasn't facing a rotting marriage but a performance carefully staged. Ethan hadn't made a mistake. He believed that with those papers he could turn me into an outsider in the very home I had built from the ground up. The only question echoing in my mind was, what gave him the audacity to think he could do that? A cheap stack of papers and the hope I didn't know my own paperwork. After that night, the house looked as calm as ever on the outside, but I knew something inside had shifted. I remembered years earlier, when everything began, how peaceful it once seemed, so much so that I never imagined the day would come when I'd have to ask myself, was this marriage built on love or on a carefully crafted illusion? My name is Marisol. I'm 40 years old. A strategic consultant. My career started with nothing more than an old laptop and a cramped rental in downtown, where I spent nights hammering out business plans for my very first clients. I worked more than 16 hours a day, learning as I went, building step by step. For the first 3 years, I never had a proper weekend. But when my small company began to stand on its own, when the first contracts crossed the $1 million mark, I knew my efforts had been worth it. Ethan entered my life during that very period. He showed up at a business seminar in Chicago, well-dressed, speaking fluently about promising startup projects. I still remember him standing next to me at the coffee counter, smiling with confidence, opening with, "I think we're listening to the same lecture, but seeing it from 2 completely different angles." That line caught my attention. To my friends, Ethan looked like a man full of ambition, tall, charismatic, always giving the impression he was holding on to a big idea. I believed it too. I even recall the night he took me to his temporary apartment, where sticky notes covered the walls. Fintech app, new social network platform, smart investment service. I looked at that rainbow of notes and saw a promising future. But slowly, those notes fell off the walls, just like the ideas that never materialized. While I kept signing contracts and expanding my client base, Ethan started to slip. He stopped showing up for job interviews, spending more time at the gym, on the golf course, or sitting for hours in front of his computer playing video games. "I'm waiting for the right opportunity," he'd say whenever I asked about work. "I don't want to waste my time on mediocre companies. Once my startup launches, it'll make waves immediately." I tried to convince myself it was strategic patience. But over the years, I saw it was only an excuse to dodge responsibility. The irony was, outside our front door, Ethan's image was entirely different. His family, especially his mother, loved to introduce him as the man who keeps the family steady. At every family gathering, she would take my hand and say in front of everyone, "You're so lucky to have Ethan. He keeps the home so you can focus on your work." A true pillar. I forced a smile, never correcting her. How could I say out loud that I paid for the house, that every utility bill came from my account, that the car he drove daily was in my name, paid off with my company's income? Even our mutual friends never suspected a thing. To them, Ethan was the charming man in perfectly fitted suits, standing beside me at events as though he were my equal partner. He knew how to play the role without revealing that he didn't actually have a real career. "Ethan's quite the gentleman," a colleague once praised. "With a husband like that, you can really throw yourself into your career." I smiled again, hiding the bitterness pounding in my chest. At one family reunion on my father's side, my dad bluntly asked, "Ethan, how's work these days? Any plans to reopen your investment consultancy?" Ethan didn't even flinch. He smiled, raised his glass, and replied, "I've set that aside for now to support Marisol. She's busy building her company, and I felt it was my duty to focus on the family. Sometimes success isn't about the name on the business card, it's about silent sacrifice." Everyone applauded. Some even looked at me with admiration. Meanwhile, I sat there feeling voiceless. The truth was, his so-called silent sacrifice meant long afternoons at bars with his so-called entrepreneur friends, designer shopping sprees charged to our joint account that only I funded, and late-night networking events that ended with him stumbling home reeking of alcohol. I thought many times about telling the truth, but I feared the picture of a broken marriage in front of friends, feared my parents' disappointed eyes, feared the awkward silence at gatherings where everyone believed I had the perfect marriage. One winter morning, I headed to work early, snow still clinging to the roof. Ethan was in the kitchen, wearing a bathrobe, sipping the coffee I had made. He said, "You're really lucky to have me. Without me, how could you focus fully on the company without worrying about the house?" I looked out the window, watching the gardener I paid for clearing snow in the yard. I didn't answer. During those years, I kept telling myself, maybe every marriage involves trade-offs. I traded shared household duties for more time to grow my business. I tried to overlook Ethan's self-congratulating comments, as long as he didn't cause serious trouble. But deep inside, a quiet suspicion began to stir. Was he preparing something I couldn't yet see? Outsiders still believed we were the perfect balance, me thriving professionally, him steady at home. The cruel part was he played the role so well that sometimes even I almost believed the performance. In the days that followed, I began noticing subtle changes in Ethan's habits, changes I might have missed if I hadn't been paying attention. Normally, he was the type to sleep in until nearly noon, always claiming that creative minds worked at night. But suddenly, he was up at 6 in the morning, neatly dressed in a pressed shirt, cologne sprayed, heading out the door with a curt line. "I have an important appointment. Might be home late." I glanced at the microwave clock flashing 6:12 and thought, who meets at this hour? But I didn't ask. I just sat there, listening to the door slam shut, leaving the house in silence. At first, I wanted to believe he had finally found an opportunity. That maybe, after years of drifting, Ethan had truly found a partner or a project. But that belief lasted only a few days until I checked our credit account. A transaction notification popped up on my phone: Garrett, Associates, Legal Services fee. The amount wasn't large compared to my income, but the name made me freeze. I knew that firm. A small law practice that advertised on buses and local radio, specializing in divorce and asset disputes. I remembered clearly, because once I'd driven past a billboard with their slogan, "We fight to get you what you deserve." My hand shook as I opened the transaction details. The date matched the very morning Ethan had claimed to have a meeting. I snapped my laptop shut, leaned back in the chair, heart pounding. Puzzle pieces scrambled in my mind, began falling into place: the sudden schedule changes, the unusually polished appearance, the evasive eyes when I asked questions. This wasn't a business opportunity. This was another plan, a plan I wasn't meant to know about. That afternoon, when I came home, Ethan appeared at the door holding a bouquet of vivid red roses. I flinched. He had never bought me flowers, not even on anniversaries. "I thought you could use a sweet surprise," he grinned, offering the bouquet. I frowned slightly. "What's going on? You've seemed so stressed." "The company's growing fast, the pressure must be a lot. I want you to know I'm here for you, supporting you." His words were gentle, but they felt like sugar-coating something else. I set the bouquet in my grandmother's crystal vase. It looked perfect, like a prop too bright for the room it stood in. That evening, while Ethan showered, I quietly checked his coat pocket. Inside, along with his wallet, I found a thick business card edged in cheap gold: Thomas Garrett, attorney at law. Bold tagline: divorce, asset disputes. I clenched the business card in my hand, trying to steady my heartbeat. So it was true. Ethan's morning meetings were visits to the law office. I sat down at the kitchen table, placing the card next to the bouquet of red roses still wet with dew. Both were evidence, one showing the plan he was hatching, the other a clumsy cover. When Ethan walked out, hair still damp, he caught my eyes fixed on the flowers. He leveled a rehearsed smile that once softened me in our early days. "See? I still care about you." I looked up at him, holding back everything I wanted to say. I whispered, "Yes, I see." But inside, I knew the roses weren't about love. They were a curtain hiding betrayal taking shape. And the question that haunted me all night was, what exactly did Ethan want from me, from this house, from this marriage? That night, I lay in bed staring at the dark ceiling. Ethan snored steadily beside me while I tossed and turned. The wind whistling through the window crack seemed to whisper, "He's preparing a game you don't know about." My hand slid to the edge of the envelope with the house deed still hidden in the nightstand drawer. The rough feel of the paper against my skin reassured me somewhat, but it also made me shiver. If Ethan discovered that I knew, how would this game change? The next morning, Ethan rose early again, tying his tie, spraying cologne, smiling as he left. I nodded quietly, then glanced at the clock. 6:20. Another meeting. I didn't need to guess. He wasn't heading to a boardroom but to Garrett Associates, where marriages were turned into business contracts. I sat at the dining table, sipping lukewarm coffee, feeling as if the bricks beneath my feet were being loosened one by one. Yet at the same time, a strange determination flared inside me. If Ethan thought he could win with cheap legal papers and stage gestures, he had forgotten one thing. I didn't build my career on illusions. I built it on preparation, calculation, and evidence. And I was ready for the fight he thought only he knew the rules to. One late afternoon, after driving home from a short business trip in Denver, Mrs. Whitaker was already waiting by the wooden fence between our houses. She was over 70, her hair completely white, always in a thick cardigan even in spring, the kind of neighbor everyone wished for, discreet, never nosy, yet never blind to what wasn't right. That day, as soon as she saw me park, she walked over, her eyes more serious than usual. "Marisol," she called softly, as if afraid someone in my house might hear, "I need to talk to you." I tightened my bag strap and stepped closer. The fading sunlight carved deep lines across her face. I noticed her hand tremble slightly as she rested it on the fence. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "I saw a strange young woman coming in and out of your house while you were away last week." My heart pounded wildly, though my face stayed calm. I whispered, "What woman? Are you sure it was my house, not someone else's?" "I'm not mistaken," she replied firmly, her eyes lit with the certainty of someone who had seen too much in her life. "I've lived on this street 40 years, Marisol. I know who goes in and out of every house." She was young, blonde, petite, but familiar somehow. She walked right through the front door, no knock, no bell, like she had a key. I bit my lip until I tasted blood. Instantly, memories flashed of items mysteriously disappearing, things Ethan claimed were sent out to be cleaned or repaired. And those mornings when he left in pressed shirts, returning later with the scent of cheap cologne I never bought him. But I kept my thoughts hidden. My voice steady, I asked, "Did you see her with Ethan?" "Yes. The first time, they came together. The second time, she was alone. I even saw her open Ethan's trunk and carry out boxes." She didn't glance my way, but I could tell. She knew her way around. Mrs. Whitaker paused, adjusting her glasses, her eyes flashing with sympathy. At first I thought she might be a relative from his side. But when I saw Ethan return later, not surprised at all. I knew this wasn't ordinary. The wind rustled through the oak trees lining the street. Across the road, kids laughed as they played basketball. Everything seemed normal, except for Mrs. Whitaker's words, like a stone breaking the still surface of a pond, sending ripples through me. "Thank you for telling me. I'll be more watchful." She gently placed her hand on my arm. "You're a good woman, Marisol. Don't let anyone take advantage of that. I've seen too much. Men can hide things well. Be careful." I forced a smile in gratitude, but it faded quickly. When I stepped inside, the house felt altered, suffocating. I looked at the framed photos, our wedding in Chicago, vacations on the Florida coast, my smile in a white dress beside Ethan. Suddenly, they looked staged, like advertisements, not real memories. That evening, I opened my laptop to work. But instead of focusing on the contract edits, my eyes kept flicking to the door. Ethan came home late, repeating the familiar line, "Meeting ran long. But I think things are moving in the right direction." He placed a small pastry box on the table. "I bought dessert for you. Your favorite." I looked at the box, then straight into his eyes. "Meeting with who?" I asked softly. Ethan hesitated a beat but quickly answered, "A group of potential investors. They're interested in my app idea." I didn't press further. But inside, Mrs. Whitaker's words knocked in my head like relentless knocking at a door. She had a key. I stayed up late, sitting in my office, desk lamp shining over neat stacks of documents. I pulled out my phone, checked the banking app, scrolling through transactions. Beyond the Garrett associate's fee. There were other small charges, from shops in the suburbs where I'd never been. One was a florist, but not the shop where he'd bought the roses days before. The flowers, the pastries, they were paint over cracks. And if not for my neighbor's whisper, I might still be fooling myself that this marriage was only going through a rough patch. I shut my laptop, stood, and walked into the bedroom. Ethan was already asleep, his breathing steady. I stared at him in the dark, searching for the man I once believed I could rely on. But the longer I looked, the more unfamiliar he seemed. And the question with no answer echoed in my head. If one day I were gone, who would walk into this house as if it belonged to them? And would I still have any place here at all? On Monday morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. I hadn't even taken off my coat when Jenna, my assistant, knocked and entered. Normally bright and cheerful, today her face looked hesitant, her eyes holding something back. "Miss Marisol, I think there's something you need to know," Jenna said, placing a thick folder on my desk. I glanced down and immediately recognized copies of crucial financial documents, balance sheets, contracts with major clients, papers tied to my personal assets. I frowned. These were supposed to be locked in the filing cabinet, keys held only by me and Jenna. "Why are these copies here?" I asked, keeping my voice calm though my pulse raced. Jenna hesitated. "Last week, Ethan came to the office. He said you asked him to pick up some documents for tax preparation. Since he's your husband, I didn't question it. I let him copy a few files." I gripped the pen in my hand tighter. "What exactly did he say?" "He said he needed to review the joint assets to plan long-term for the family." I'm so sorry. I never imagined." Her voice trailed off. I exhaled, forcing calm, placing my hand gently on her shoulder. "It's not your fault. He's my husband, you trusted him. That's only natural. But from now on, any company or personal asset documents stay between you and me. No one else." "Understood." "Understood." Jenna nodded quickly, then opened the folder and flipped to the page marked with red pen. "I found this. He paid special attention to the cabin in Vermont and the heirloom jewelry. I saw him taking detailed notes." My eyes locked on the scribbles in the margins. Ethan's familiar handwriting. He listed, Vermont cabin estimated market value $800,000. Family jewelry, needs appraisal. Pearl set, diamond ring, Cartier watch. Ethan had never cared about any of this. The Vermont cabin was a gift from my father. Ethan once complained it had no Wi-Fi and scoffed that it was nothing but an old shack. My grandmother's heirloom jewelry, he had dismissed as antique junk no one wears. Yet now, all of it appeared on his handwritten list like a property inventory before trial. I snapped the folder shut, taking a deep breath. In that instant, every fragment from the past days formed a sharp picture. The early morning disappearances, the payments to Garrett, associates, the sudden bouquet of roses, Mrs. Whitaker's whisper about the strange woman. Ethan wasn't only betraying me emotionally. He was preparing a lawsuit, and I was the defendant in the game he had staged. "Jenna, are you sure he copied everything?" I asked. "No. I only let him take some summary reports, not the original contracts or confidential files. I knew those were important, so I kept them. But it's clear he's trying to gather information." I nodded, grateful for Jenna's caution. Yet anger surged in my chest. Ethan had crossed the final line. He had invaded my work, my family's legacy, the very things I had protected for years. Jenna seemed to wait for my reaction. I spoke softly. "You did the right thing telling me. Don't blame yourself. From now on, help me monitor every unusual expense. If you see any transaction tied to lawyers or asset appraisals, report to me immediately." "Yes, ma'am," Jenna answered, her face returning to determination. When she left, I sat still for a long while, staring out the window where the morning sun poured in. Outside, traffic rushed as always, people hurrying to work like any other day. But inside me, everything had changed. I understood now. Ethan was no longer a lazy freeloader. He was calculating, collecting evidence, preparing to steal what had never belonged to him. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out my personal notebook. On a blank page, I wrote the first line, Ethan, suspicious actions. Then I listed each detail, leaving early in suspicious actions. The morning, claiming meeting. Expenses at Garrett, associates, bringing flowers as cover. Copies of financial records, notes on Vermont cabin and heirloom jewelry. Each bullet point cut into the page like a blade, turning into a log of evidence I knew I would one day use. That afternoon, Ethan called, his voice light. Want to have dinner out? I booked a table at your favorite Italian place. I swallowed hard. He was still performing the role of the attentive husband. I answered curtly, I'm busy at work. Go ahead without me. There was a pause, then he said, no problem, another time. I hung up, my chest filled with a mix of ache and cold resolve. He thought I was still naive, still fooled by flowers and romantic dinners. But he had no idea I was already seeing the truth. That night, I opened my safe, checking each piece of heirloom jewelry. The pieces I kept there were still in place, which briefly calmed me, but several items Ethan had claimed were out for cleaning weren't in the safe at all. I closed the safe, but the comfort was gone. Because now I understood, Ethan had already set his predator's eyes on them. And I had to prepare for the day he made his move. That evening, as I left the office, Ethan called again, his tone excited, come home early. I've got a surprise for you. I heard his laugh through the phone. The laugh I once thought was warmth now sounded like an alarm bell. I drove home with a heavy heart. When I opened the door, the dining table was already set. Candlelight flickered against crystal glasses, the scent of roasted beef and red wine filled the air. Ethan stood beside the table in a crisp white shirt and neat tie, holding a bouquet of white lilies. Marisol, you're most beautiful coming home from work. Sit down, he said, pulling out a chair, his smile never reaching his eyes. I sat, feeling like I was watching a stage play. Ethan was the lead actor, waiting for his climax. The meal passed with meaningless chatter. Ethan spoke of his fintech project, about interested investors, about contracts around the corner. I nodded, watching his hand tremble slightly as he poured the wine. He was never good at hiding nerves. Then, as I set down my fork and knife, Ethan stood, walked to the wooden cabinet, and returned with a stack of papers. He placed them on the table. I think it's time we get clear. I looked down. The bold words on the first page froze the blood in my veins. Separation agreement. I lifted my gaze to Ethan's confident eyes. He pushed the papers toward me. We've grown apart. I don't want us to suffer anymore. Sign this, make it clean. I only need a few reasonable things. I flipped through the pages. My eyes stuck to the bullet points. The current house, full ownership to Ethan. Strategic consulting firm, 50% of shares transferred to Ethan. Vermont cabin and all inherited assets, including jewelry and the watch, transferred to Ethan. I set the paper down, my face calm though my heart pounded. You want all of this? I asked softly, surprising even myself with the calm in my voice. Ethan didn't blink. This is fair. I sacrificed my career to care for our family. I deserve my share. I tilted my head, eyes piercing him. You cared for the family. How exactly? Ethan froze briefly, then forced a laugh, awkward and brittle. Marisol, don't be difficult. You know I've been here, in this house, supporting you every day. You have your career, your name, because I had your back. Without me, you'd have burned out long ago. I looked at the hand he had placed on the papers. The same hand that had taken my credit card countless times. The same hand that drove the car in my name, ordered meals paid from my account. A smooth hand that had never carried the weight of a real day's labor. I inhaled deeply. Then, gave a small nod. If this is what you want, I'll sign. Ethan's smile spread in triumph as he slid a pen toward me. I knew you'd understand. Sign it, and everything will be smooth. I picked up the pen, slowly writing my name at the bottom. As I signed, my finger brushed the side of my wristwatch, the birthday gift from my father. I pressed the small button, and the hidden recorder inside clicked on. I finished signing, set the pen down, and slid the papers back to Ethan. Here. Take it. Ethan snatched them up, clutching them like a prize, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. You'll see, this is best for both of us. We'll avoid unnecessary fights. I smiled, then rose to clear the table, masking the trembling in my chest. Unsigned, unfiled, and contradicted by the trust, those papers had no legal weight, and I knew it. But the recording his voice, his admissions, his absurd demands was worth far more. As I turned to the sink, Ethan whistled, stepping into the living room. I heard the pop of a wine bottle, the clink of glasses. He thought he had won. But I knew from the moment I pressed record the balance had shifted. I hadn't yet put away the papers on my desk when the phone rang. It was Jennifer, my neighbor 2 doors down. Her voice dropped to a whisper, as if someone might overhear. Marisol, do you know there's a group of people in your house right now? They're loud, blasting music. Is he throwing a party? I froze. My house, the same place where Ethan had staged a dinner with meaningless papers only hours earlier, had now become an impromptu dance floor. Jennifer hesitated. He's out on the porch, raising his glass and shouting cheers with his buddies. I even saw some of them recording. I thanked her and hung up, my chest frozen. I opened my phone and scrolled through social media. It took only a few seconds to find Ethan's latest post. New chapter. My house, my rules. #fresh start, leveling up. In the photo, he stood in the middle of my living room, beer raised high, noisy friends behind him. By the sofa, my grandmother's wooden cabinet had been shoved aside to make space for speakers. No words could capture the shamelessness. Yet in that moment, I realized he had left behind a piece of public evidence. About 15 minutes later, my phone lit up again. This time it was a message from Jenna, my assistant. She sent a screenshot. Ethan had posted a short video on his Instagram story. In it, he walked around my office, boasting, "No more spreadsheets, no more boring charts. This is my space now." I saw my desk buried under pizza boxes, beer cans, and 3 brand new gaming monitors. Even the leather chair I bought for long work nights had turned into a spinning seat for his friends' jokes. Jenna added, "I saved everything. This is basically a confession." Yes. It wasn't ridiculous, it was proof of his deliberate attempt to take over property. Close to midnight, I called my mother. I hadn't planned to explain everything, but she had already seen fragments spreading online. Ethan hadn't stopped at posting on his account. He had shared it on Facebook, where both families and friends could see. "Marisol," my mother's voice trembled, "are you all right?" I saw Ethan bragging that his new house gave him freedom. You're still there, aren't you?" I swallowed hard, briefly explaining that I was staying at a hotel that week and everything she saw was nothing more than a cheap act. She sighed, "Your father spent years saving to give you that house. And he treats it like it never existed." In my mind, I still saw my father sitting on the porch, repairing each wooden fence slat by hand. He never worked empty-handed, so unlike Ethan, who never once picked up a hammer at home. The next morning, before I could sip my coffee, I received an email from Rachel, my attorney. Attached were countless screenshots and downloaded videos. She wrote, "Ethan publicly declared the house as his property. More importantly, he recorded his trespassing and shared it. This is invaluable evidence. In court, what he posts online carries more weight than arguments at the dinner table. Sometimes, the truth doesn't need me to prove it. It reveals itself through the opponent's own foolish actions." At noon, I stopped by the office. Jenna handed me a USB drive. I saved every post, even the videos he deleted later. Some of his friends tagged him, I screenshotted those too. "Nothing's gone." I took it, meeting her worried gaze. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know it might sound harsh, but I've never seen a man so reckless he publicly incriminates himself." I placed a hand on her shoulder, forcing a faint smile. "It's not your fault. Sometimes people get drunk on their imagined victory, and forget they're exposing who they really are." That afternoon, Jennifer messaged me again. She sent a video taken from her window. Ethan stood in the yard, bragging to his friends about taking back control from me. His voice blended with the music. She signed it. "Everything is mine now. You'll see, this place will be legendary." His friends laughed, some clapped, some recorded more videos. I heard glasses clinking while the evening sun lit Ethan's smug face. I clenched my phone. Last night, I had signed that worthless paper only to capture the recording. Now, Ethan had handed me golden proof online. And I, without even stepping forward, already held everything I needed. The next morning, I walked into Rachel's office. The room glowed with sunlight. Stacks of files marked with neon tabs lined the desk. Rachel looked up, her gaze sharp as a blade, though her tone remained calm. "Marisol, this is the moment you take back control. Ethan thinks he's ahead, but he's left. Gaping holes." Our job is to tighten them. The door opened, and Marcus, my company's CFO, walked in with his laptop. He set it down, screen glowing with spreadsheets full of numbers. I've reviewed everything. Over the past 3 months, Ethan used the company card at least 17 times for personal expenses. BMW, club membership, wine, even executive presence coaching at $400 a month. All accounts are disabled now. If he tries to swipe, the system will decline immediately. Rachel nodded. Good. But we still have the smart home system. I don't want him opening the garage or interfering remotely. Marcus typed a few commands, then turned the screen toward me. Done. Now only your phone and fingerprint will unlock it. All old admin accounts are deleted. Before I could respond, the door opened again. Sophia, my sister, stepped in. Her hair was messy from the overnight flight from Seattle, but her eyes blazed with determination. I can't stay out of this anymore. I saw all of Ethan's posts, and I want to help. I still have the old key to the Vermont cabin. If needed, I'll go check. I don't believe he'll leave it alone. I grasped Sophia's hand. Having her beside me felt more comforting than any words. I had fought alone for so long, now I had a network behind me. At noon, Marcus sent the first report. I opened my phone, scanning each line. 10:42 a.m. Ethan tried the card at a cafe, declined. 11:05 a.m. Gas station, declined. 11:27 a.m. Apple Pay, declined. At the bottom, Marcus noted, he's panicking. Multiple declines in a row. Rachel skimmed it, the corner of her mouth curving slightly. This is proof he's fully dependent. No one can argue Ethan is a provider when he can't even pay for his morning coffee. Sophia gasped, my God. And all this time, he sat in front of the family claiming he carried everything. That afternoon, I got a message from Jennifer, my neighbor. He tried the smart lock code 3 times, failed. Then he pounded on the door, called repeatedly, but the phone didn't work either. I showed Rachel the screen. She nodded, that phone was on the company plan. I cut it this morning. Now it's nothing but a shell. I leaned back in the chair, breathing deep. For the first time in months, I felt truly free of the shadow Ethan had cast. His fake empire was crumbling piece by piece, and the bitter irony was, he himself had pressed the button to bring it down. That morning, Jenna entered my office, face hesitant. Usually lively, today she clutched her phone as if unsure whether to hand it over. Miss Marisol. I think you need to see this. I caught her eyes, already sensing bad news. Jenna handed me her phone. On the screen was the Instagram page of a young woman, Jessica Reeves. Photos of Jessica beamed in a brightly lit gym, lips smiling, phone raised for selfies. But what froze my breath wasn't her face, it was the jewelry she wore. Around Jessica's neck glittered the pearl necklace my grandmother had given me on my college graduation day. On her wrist, the Cartier watch Sophia and I had bought together on our New York trip. In another photo, Jessica sat at a cafe, wearing the diamond tennis bracelet Ethan once claimed was at the jeweler for repairs. I clenched my hands until nails dug into skin. Jenna gently set the phone down. I didn't want to believe it. But these are yours. I've seen you wear them at company events. I think Ethan gave them to her. I couldn't speak. The room seemed to shrink, the ticking wall clock pounding heavy beats. Ethan had taken pieces of my family's memories, turning them into trinkets for another woman. That afternoon, I visited Mrs. Whitaker. She rarely meddled in others' affairs. But this time, her eyes were grave, her voice low. Marisol, I've held back many times. But I can't stay silent. She slowly approached the wooden table where her laptop sat. Opening a file, she played a video. On screen was my house's front gate, with date and time stamps. Ethan's BMW parked neatly. Then, a young blonde woman with an athletic frame stepped out, jingled a set of keys, and unlocked the door as if it were her own. My chest tightened. It was Jessica Reeves. Mrs. Whitaker sighed. This isn't the first time. I have at least 3 more clips, all on days I know you were away on business. She wasn't sneaky, she even waved to neighbors. As if to declare she belonged there. Could you give me a copy of this video? I asked. She nodded, her eyes full of compassion. Marisol, I watched your parents treat that house like treasure. I can't stand by while someone else walks in as if they own it. If you need a witness, I'll testify. I gripped her hand, thanking her through trembling words. Inside, fury and sorrow knotted into something unshakable. That evening, I called Sophia. Her voice cracked as soon as she heard. Grandma's pearls? The Cartier watch? Oh my God, sis, he has no boundaries left. How could he give those away? He didn't take them, he let her flaunt them. Worse, she has a key. Ethan gave her the right to step into my life as if she were an equal owner. Sophia exhaled heavily. This isn't about marriage anymore. It's theft of property and dignity. But at least, we have undeniable proof. After the call, I sat alone, the hotel light casting long shadows on the wall. My phone still displayed Jessica's Instagram page. Her radiant smile burned in my eyes, the opposite of the ache tightening in my chest. Yet in a hidden corner of that pain, I saw the glimmer of truth. Those very photos, that very smile, that #new beginnings, would become the evidence that condemned Ethan and his mistress. The courtroom was packed that day. The sound of the gavel silenced the whispers between the rows of spectators. I sat beside Rachel, our hands quietly clasped beneath the table. Across from us, Ethan wore a black suit and red tie, but his face betrayed exhaustion. His eyes darted away, occasionally flicking toward me with a mix of defiance and unease. Rachel rose. Her voice was clear, steady, without a hint of tremor. Your Honor, we present the most critical piece of evidence. The deed to the Maple Drive property does not belong solely to the defendant, Ethan Hayes, but is held by the CBW Trust, a legally established trust created years before the marriage. The sole beneficiary, Marisol. The room erupted with murmurs. My heartbeat thundered in my chest. Rachel calmly turned the pages of the documents, holding them up for the judge. Here is the trust formation document, dated March 15, 2 years before their wedding. And here are the addenda, signed multiple times by Ethan Hayes, confirming his full awareness and agreement with this ownership structure. On the large screen, his familiar signature appeared, slanted, firm strokes, undeniable. Ethan's lawyer shot up, voice nearly cracking. Objection. We have never, but Rachel cut him off, her gaze like a blade. It cannot be denied when the defendant himself signed. This is a notarized document, bearing the seal of the state. If the other side wishes to dispute it, they must dispute their client's very signature. Ethan squirmed in his seat, his hand gripping his pant leg, while his attorney frantically bent over his phone. The courtroom fell silent, every eye fixed on them. Through the microphone, I heard the lawyer's muffled shout into his phone, barely containing his panic. Do you even realize what you've signed? You handed her the bullet to shoot you with. Whispers rippled again. I glanced at Ethan. His face had drained of color, lips pressed tight, eyes wide. With shock, he bowed his head, as if finally realizing he had armed his opponent with his own hand. In that moment, my mind flashed back to the night I discovered the old envelope in the locked drawer. I remembered the trembling hands as I peeled back the layers, the faint musty scent of aged paper, and the solemn words, CBW Trust. Back then, I didn't fully understand, but instinct told me it mattered. Now, before everyone, it was no longer a forgotten document. It was a lifeline. The boundary between truth and the illusion Ethan had built. He could scream, "This house is mine," brandish false separation agreements, flaunt himself online. But that single envelope, that single signature of his own, had torn down the facade. The judge reviewed the documents Rachel submitted, then spoke firmly. The court recognizes the legal validity of the CBW Trust. Defendant Ethan Hayes signed repeatedly in acknowledgement. Therefore, Ethan Hayes has no ownership claim to the Maple Drive property. The words echoed like the final bell of a play. Without looking, I knew Ethan was trembling, his fists pounding the wooden table, the sound carrying through the heavy silence. Rachel sat down beside me, leaned slightly, and whispered, "You see, sometimes the opponent paves the way themselves." Ethan wrote his own verdict. Inside me, there was no longer searing rage, only clarity. The lies, the performances, the long months of illusion had crumbled. The court's ruling came swifter than I expected. Ethan was ordered to vacate the house within 72 hours. News spread through the neighborhood overnight. By the next morning, when the moving truck pulled up, nearly every neighbor stood on their porches, arms crossed, eyes filled with both curiosity and disdain. I watched quietly from behind the curtain. Ethan, in a wrinkled shirt, his face hollow from sleepless nights, barked into his phone with no answer. Movers hauled box after box, sweat streaking their foreheads, while Ethan issued sharp orders, clinging to the last illusion of control. Mrs. Whitaker stood at the walkway with her cane, shaking her head. "I've never seen a man drive himself to such disgrace." Another neighbor murmured, "Remember a few weeks ago when he bragged online? My house, my rules? Now look, he can't even open the garage door." Laughter rippled through the crowd. I didn't feel triumphant, but I didn't feel pity either. It was like watching a film reel rewind, exposing the truth I had endured all along. The height of humiliation came when Ethan realized Jessica, the woman he once hailed as his new future, was gone. Jenna had stumbled across it first, a photo of Jessica on Instagram, hand in hand with a wealthy middle-aged businessman, vacationing in Miami. The caption read, "Real stability, grateful new chapter." Sophia handed me her phone, chuckling bitterly. See, Jessica really did get her new beginnings not with Ethan. Among the boxes and chaos, Ethan still tried calling her. From my window, I saw his lips moving, his face twisted with anger. Then the phone slipped from his hand, shattered on the pavement. He fell to his knees, picking up shards, the screen flickering black. The press soon picked it up. A local business journal ran the headline, "Failed Entrepreneur Ethan Hayes, From Startup Ambition to Humiliating Divorce." They quoted his past boasts, then paired them with images of him moving out of the house with rented trucks. The comment sections overflowed with mockery. "This is why you never brag too soon." Rules? The only rule now is paying the movers. A costly end for someone who never lifted a finger. 3 days later, the house was quiet at last. Ethan was gone, with only a few suitcases and rushed boxes. What he left behind was shame, something no moving truck could carry away. I walked the hallway, brushing my fingers along the walls. Each room seemed to breathe again, free from the heavy presence of the man who once shouted in my face, "This house is mine." The next morning, a reporter knocked on the door. Polite, he asked if I wanted to comment on the story spreading fast. I shook my head, replying simply, "The truth has spoken loudly enough. I don't need to add more." He nodded, smiled faintly, and left. I stood at the doorway on a crisp morning, gripping the new set of keys. Turning them, the click rang sharp and final, my declaration, that from this day on, the house belonged to me alone. I flung open every window. Sunlight poured in, fresh air swept through, carrying out the stale stench of Ethan's cheap liquor nights. I inhaled deeply, my chest lighter, as if the house itself was breathing again for the first time in months. The living room glowed. I gathered the remnants of Ethan's life, dusty sneakers, worn-out shirts, startup magazines he never read past the cover. They went into black trash bags, dragged to the curb. The space was mine again. That afternoon I tackled the biggest project, transforming the garage into a library. Once cluttered with useless boxes, it now gleamed fresh after a coat of ivory paint. Wooden shelves lined the walls, a long table stood in the center. On the main wall, I hung my college diploma, photos from my consulting firm's launch, and faded family pictures. Each piece restored the soul of the room. No trace of Ethan, only history, achievement, and love. Sophia arrived that evening, carrying a box of old books. She set it down, her eyes bright. "I thought this library needed a corner for art books. Grandma always wanted you to have a place to display memories." I hugged her, eyes stinging. "Thank you. Now it truly feels like ours, not anyone else's." That weekend, I hosted a small gathering. No showiness, just close family and neighbors who had witnessed the storm. The living room glowed with warm light. The table draped in white, crystal glasses sparkling. Mrs. Whitaker placed her hand on my shoulder. "Marisol, you've restored this house to its true meaning. I once feared you'd leave, but today I see you stronger than ever." Marcus raised his glass, his eyes playful. "Sometimes, you don't need to destroy someone. They'll do it themselves." Laughter filled the room. Sophia sat at the corner, Jenna chatted animatedly. Mrs. Whitaker nodded in quiet approval. They weren't there to pity me, but to share in the peace of this moment. I lifted my glass, no words needed. The chime of clinking crystal rang clear, as if announcing the opening of a new chapter. And perhaps, looking back, I understood this story wasn't about a broken marriage or a man who lost everything by his own hand. It was about how a house, a keepsake, a memory, could become the anchor for a woman to find herself again. Everyone will see it differently. Some will say Ethan's downfall was inevitable. Others may believe the true prize wasn't victory, but the peace that followed. But what about you? In that situation, would you fight until the end or quietly walk away and let the truth expose itself? Leave your thoughts in the comments, I would love to hear them. And if you want to hear more stories about family, secrets, wounds, and the strength to overcome, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because there are more stories, waiting stories that might make you reflect on your own life and perhaps find connection in the smallest details.